The camera slowly fades in on a frail man sitting alone in a dimly lit living room. His hands tremble as he holds a thick folder of papers. On the front cover, bold letters read, "Life Insurance Policy, 1,000. For 75 years, this man worked, saved, and sacrificed. He believed in the system contract's signatures insurance. This was the promise of America. A promise that if you worked hard, you could protect the people you loved most." But tonight, as he flips through the pages, his heart sinks. Something is wrong. The name written as beneficiary is not what he remembers. In one line of ink, his entire legacy, his American dream, has been stolen. His voice breaks as he whispers, "I worked all my life for this family, and in one moment, they stole it from me." The betrayal did not come from strangers, scammers, or thieves in the night. It came from inside his own home, from the very people he trusted more than anyone. Now everything he built, everything he believed in, is about to collapse. So I ask you, if this was your father, your family, your life's work on the line, what would you do? Would you forgive, or would you fight back? Because in the next 45 minutes, you'll hear the story of how $1 million promise became the seed of a family's destruction. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people still wave to each other while mowing their lawns. Inside a modest but well-kept home lived a 75-year-old man named Robert. Widowed for more than a decade, Robert had spent his life believing in the principles he was taught as a child: work hard, save your money, play by the rules, and America will reward you. For Robert, that reward came in the form of stability. He had worked 3 jobs when his children were young, sometimes driving a delivery truck through the night just to make sure there was food on the table. Over the years, he put away every dollar he could, and one of his proudest achievements was purchasing a life insurance policy worth $1 million. To him, that policy wasn't just paperwork. It was a promise carved in stone that when his time came, his children would be cared for equally and without conflict. His son Michael still lived nearby. Michael was in his late 40s, quiet, polite, but often hesitant, a man who had never quite grown out of depending on others to make decisions for him. He was married to Linda, a woman who radiated warmth to outsiders. She would bring Robert hot meals offered to drive him to the doctor and call him Dad with a smile that seemed sincere. She always said the right words. "Dad, you shouldn't stress about money. If you trust us, I'll make sure the kids are safe. You deserve to relax." To Robert, those words sounded like comfort. To Linda, they were something else entirely. Then there was Emily, his youngest child and only daughter. Emily had moved states away for work, but she never let distance become a wall. She called Robert every other night, asked about his health, reminded him to take his medication, and often told him, "Dad, you've done enough. I just want you to be happy." Between the 2 siblings, Emily carried the spirit of their late mother, gentle, strong, and unwaveringly honest. On the surface, the family looked stable. Holidays were celebrated together. Robert's grandchildren played in his yard. Linda busied herself in the kitchen, laughing as she carried plates to the table. Michael sat quietly, nodding along, grateful to avoid conflict. But under that veneer of harmony, tiny cracks began to appear. Robert started to notice small comments from Linda. She would say things like, "Maybe it makes sense for everything to be in Michael's name, just to keep things simple. Or don't you think the kids' future would be safer if everything stayed within our side of the family?" Michael rarely disagreed with her. Whenever Robert raised questions about finances, Michael would fidget, avoid eye contact, and change the subject. Robert brushed it off. He told himself it was normal. After all, he believed in paperwork. Contracts don't lie. Signatures don't move on their own. His policy was clear: the beneficiaries were his 2 children equally. No one could take that away. Still, something gnawed at him. It was like a faint itch at the back of his mind. He remembered the promise he had made to his wife on her deathbed. "I'll protect both of them. They'll never have to fight." That promise weighed heavily on him, especially as age began to slow his body and fog his memory. When Emily announced she was coming to visit for a long weekend, Robert felt a rare wave of joy. He had missed her laughter filling the house. They planned to spend time together, go to church, maybe even look over his financial papers just to keep everything organized. On Saturday morning, Emily accompanied him to the insurance office downtown. Robert had received a letter about updating his records, nothing serious, just a routine notice. He thought it might be good for Emily to see everything, to reassure her that her future was secure. The office was quiet, the hum of computers mixing with the faint chatter of clerks. A young employee pulled up Robert's file on the screen. She was polite, professional, and a little distracted, typing quickly as she verified details. She glanced at the monitor and said casually, almost offhand, "So the beneficiary has already been changed." The words froze Emily in her chair. She leaned forward. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" The clerk blinked, realizing her slip. "Oh, sorry. I mean, the file shows the updated beneficiary information. It's already on record." Robert frowned, his brow furrowing. "Updated, no. I haven't changed anything." Emily's heart raced. Her mind spun. What did the clerk mean? Changed to who, how, when? The clerk quickly tried to recover, shuffling papers and muttering, "Maybe it's a system note. I'll double-check later." But the damage was done. The seed of dread had been planted. Emily looked at her father. He sat stiff, gripping his cane tightly, his face pale. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. The ride home was silent. Emily wanted to ask more questions, but Robert's trembling hand said enough. Something was wrong, very wrong, and neither of them yet understood just how deep that wrong would go. That night, Emily lingered at the kitchen table while Robert sipped his tea. The air between them was thick with unspoken worry. She finally asked, "Dad, have you ever signed anything with the insurance company recently? Any papers?" Robert shook his head firmly. "No, Emily. I may be old, but I'd remember something like that. The only papers I've touched are bills and church newsletters." His voice was steady, but his hand trembled as he set the cup down. Across the room, Michael and Linda laughed with the grandchildren. To anyone else, it looked like a picture of happiness. But Emily studied her sister-in-law more closely. Linda's smile was wide, her tone cheerful, yet her eyes flickered with something unreadable when she glanced at Robert. Emily told herself she might be overthinking. Still, that single sentence from the clerk, "The beneficiary has already been changed," echoed like a warning bell she couldn't silence, and in her heart she knew this was only the beginning of something much darker. 20 years earlier, the world looked different for Robert. He was younger then, still carrying the strength in his shoulders from decades of factory shifts and late-night delivery runs. His wife, Margaret, stood by his side as he sat across a polished wooden desk at the local insurance office. The agent slid the contract across to him, explaining the terms with professional clarity, a $1 million life insurance policy. "Upon your passing, the beneficiaries, your children will each receive half. It guarantees their future, Mr. Whitman. It guarantees fairness." Robert signed with a steady hand, his chest swelling with pride. He leaned over to Margaret and whispered, "This is the American way. My children will never have to fight." For him, that policy wasn't just ink on paper. It was security, dignity, and a legacy carved into stone. It meant that the sacrifices he made, skipping meals so his kids could eat, missing holidays because of double shifts, would have meaning long after he was gone. Not long after Margaret's health declined. The once vibrant woman who filled the house with laughter was confined to a hospital bed. Robert sat beside her every night, holding her hand, promising her that he would keep the family together. On one of her last days, she whispered, "Promise me, Robert. Promise me they'll both be protected. Don't let them turn against each other." His voice cracked, but his answer was firm. "I promise. They'll never have to fight. I'll make sure of it." That vow never left him. It was etched deeper than the ink on the contract. Michael, their firstborn, had always been different. As a boy, he struggled with confidence. He was gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of child who avoided confrontation at all costs. Teachers called him sensitive, and Robert often worried that the world would crush him. Despite encouragement, Michael grew into a man who leaned heavily on others, especially on stronger personalities who could make choices for him. Emily, the youngest, was her mother's reflection. She had Margaret's resilience, her smile, and her sense of fairness. Even as a child, Emily would argue passionately when she felt something was unjust. She would stand between playground bullies and smaller kids, unafraid of consequences. Robert admired that fire in her. It reassured him that the family's values would live on. Because of this contrast, Robert knew he had to be careful. If left to themselves, Michael might be overshadowed and Emily might carry burdens alone. The insurance policy, split evenly, was Robert's way of ensuring balance, a safeguard against the imbalances of life itself. Years later, Michael met Linda. From the moment she walked into Robert's home, she played the part of the perfect daughter-in-law. She cooked meals, brought over groceries, and greeted Robert with warmth. "Hi, Dad. I made your favorite stew." Her laughter filled the house, Her hands were always busy helping, and her presence seemed like a blessing. Robert told friends at church, "I couldn't have asked for a kinder daughter-in-law." But occasionally, in quiet moments, Robert caught something in her eyes, a sharp glimmer, a calculation behind the sweetness. He dismissed it as his imagination. After all, Linda was devoted, wasn't she? Still, little remarks began to surface over the years. While clearing dishes, Linda would casually say, "Dad, you don't need to worry about money. If you leave things to Michael, I'll make sure everything is handled for the kids." Or, wouldn't it be simpler if all the assets were in one name? Less confusion for the family. Robert would chuckle, brushing it off. "The papers are clear. It's all written down, fair and square." But in Linda's smile lingered something unspoken. Michael, too, seemed to change. Once he married Linda, he grew quieter around his father. When Robert tried to discuss finances, Michael often shifted uncomfortably and let Linda speak for them both. It was subtle at first, but over the years, Robert noticed that his son rarely voiced his own opinions anymore. At Sunday dinners, the family looked picture perfect. Children played in the yard, Linda bustled in the kitchen, and Michael sat quietly at her side. Emily, when she could visit, added brightness to the room with her laughter. From the outside, the Whitmans looked like a wholesome American family. But beneath the surface, tiny cracks widened. Emily noticed the way Linda positioned herself as the household authority, speaking for Michael, guiding conversations toward the future. She noticed how her brother deferred, how her father sometimes looked uneasy but said nothing. Robert remembered Margaret's words, often, "Promise me they'll both be protected." He clung to that promise. He reminded himself that the policy was unshakable. A signature, a contract, those things could never lie. What Robert didn't realize was that even the strongest walls can be undermined from within. Behind Linda's sweet gestures and Sunday smiles, something else was taking shape. Something quiet, patient, and calculated. And while Robert believed his family was safe, the plan was already in motion. Robert often thought back to the small promises he made during the ordinary days that followed Margaret's death. Every Sunday, he kept her chair at the dinner table, a silent reminder of the balance she brought. He told himself that as long as the family gathered under one roof, her spirit was still alive. But over time, he couldn't ignore how the atmosphere shifted. Emily's visits were filled with genuine laughter and heartfelt talks, while Linda's presence was filled with efficiency and control. She organized the meals, directed the conversations, and even spoke about Robert's health as if she were his official caretaker. Michael, once eager to ask his father's advice, stopped bringing up decisions altogether. He would glance at Linda before answering simple questions as if waiting for her approval. Robert noticed it, but he convinced himself not to worry. They're married, he thought. That's what couples do. Still late at night, when he sat alone in the quiet house, he replayed Margaret's final words in his mind. The vow weighed heavily on him, to protect both children, to prevent conflict. He believed the insurance policy was his safeguard. What he didn't realize was that the danger wasn't outside. It was sitting at his own dinner table, smiling sweetly and already thinking 3 steps ahead. The day after the insurance office visit, Robert and Emily sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Bills, church bulletins, and the original copy of his insurance policy lay spread out in front of them. Robert's hands trembled as he flipped through page after page. "Emily, I never changed this," he muttered. "I would remember. I've guarded this policy like my Bible." Emily leaned over her eyes, scanning the fine print. And then her breath caught. The name in bold letters, beneficiary, Linda Whitman. She froze. "Dad, it's her. Linda. She's listed as the sole beneficiary." Robert's eyes widened. "That's impossible. It should be Michael and you, equally. That's how it has always been." A week later, Robert demanded a meeting with the insurance company. Emily went with him. In the sterile conference room, a representative placed a folder on the table. Inside was the official amendment form. Robert stared at it, his heart pounding. The signature was his. The notarized amendment carried his name alongside a photocopy of his government ID. It looked flawless. "This is not mine," Robert said firmly. "I didn't sign this." The representative's tone was professional but unyielding. "Mr. Whitman, the documents are complete and authenticated. We have no reason to believe they are fraudulent. The beneficiary is now legally updated to Linda Whitman." Emily slammed her hand on the table. That's not possible. He never authorized this. Someone forged it. The representative adjusted his glasses. I understand your concern, but as far as our records show, everything is legitimate. When they returned home, Linda was waiting in the living room with Michael by her side. She tilted her head with sympathetic concern. Dad, maybe you don't remember? You once told me you wanted security for your grandson. You wanted to make sure the money stayed with Michael's family. Robert's face flushed with anger. I never said that. How dare you put words in my mouth? Linda pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes glistening as though wounded. I would never hurt you. Maybe your memory isn't as strong as it used to be. The words cut deeper than any blade. Robert stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table. Michael finally spoke, his voice small. Dad, maybe you just forgot. It's possible. Robert turned on him, eyes blazing. Forgot I promised your mother on her deathbed that you both would be protected equally. Do you think I'd forget that? Michael looked away, unable to meet his father's gaze. Later that night, Robert awoke to the sound of hushed voices in the hallway. He shuffled closer, careful not to be heard. Linda's voice, soft but sharp. If Dad really loved us, he'd make sure everything is safe in our hands. You have to stop doubting me, Michael. I'm protecting our future. Michael murmured, barely audible, I don't know if this is right. Don't be weak. Linda snapped in a whisper. You've always been too afraid to stand up. Trust me, once this is settled, no one will question it again. Robert's chest tightened. His own son was silent in the face of betrayal, letting his wife dictate the future. He pressed a trembling hand against the wall, the weight of isolation pressing down on him. The following week, Robert received a formal notice from the insurance company, beneficiary change confirmed. Effective immediately. Emily confronted Linda in the kitchen. You're behind this, don't pretend otherwise. Linda's smile never wavered. Emily, I don't know what you're talking about. Your father made his decision. It's not my place to question him. He didn't make this decision, Emily shot back, and I'll prove it. For days, Emily pored over her father's files, scanning emails, documents, and old records. Robert grew quieter, often sitting alone in his armchair, staring at the framed photo of Margaret on the mantel. He whispered to the photo, sometimes I tried, Maggie. I tried to keep my promise. When Emily finally called him over, her hands trembled with excitement. On her laptop screen was a scanned email Robert had sent weeks earlier to the insurance company. The subject line read, Confirmation of beneficiary status. The body of the email was simple. I confirm, I never requested any beneficiary change. The original policy must remain as written. Emily pointed to the screen. Dad, this is proof. You told them. They ignored you. Robert leaned in, tears brimming in his eyes. Thank God. This shows I'm not crazy. But their lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was less optimistic. This is helpful, he said carefully. But an email can be argued as informal. The signed amendment they have on file is legally stronger evidence. Emily clenched her fists. So what you're saying, we can't fight this? Harrison sighed. I'm saying it will be an uphill battle. The court will almost always favor notarized documents over electronic communication. We'll need more than this if we want to win. Robert buried his face in his hands. So they'll believe a piece of paper over my own word, I'm afraid so. Harrison replied. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. Robert sat at the plaintiff's table, his cane resting against the chair, his face lined with exhaustion. Emily sat beside him, clutching a folder of evidence that suddenly felt far too thin. On the other side of the room, Linda adjusted her pearl necklace with quiet confidence. Michael sat with her, his shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor, looking like a man who had already surrendered. The judge entered and everyone rose. When the proceedings began, the insurance company's attorney spoke first. He laid out the evidence with clinical precision, the signed amendment, the fingerprint verification, and the official notary stamp. Your Honor, the company followed all standard procedures. Mr. Whitman's request was processed correctly. There is no indication of fraud. The beneficiary is without question Linda Whitman. Emily's stomach churned. She glanced at her father, whose eyes never left the contract on the table. Their lawyer, Mr. Harrison, rose to his feet. Your Honor. My client maintains that he never authorized this change. We have here an email sent directly from Mr. Whitman to the company explicitly stating that no beneficiary change should occur. The judge leaned forward. Email is not as strong as signed documentation. Is there any evidence suggesting the signature is forged? Harrison hesitated. At this point, we cannot provide a forensic report, but the timing of this so-called amendment is suspicious. It occurred shortly after Mrs. Whitman began handling more of Mr. Whitman's affairs. He gestured toward Linda. Linda tilted her head sweetly, her voice soft but firm. Your Honor, I would never manipulate my father-in-law. He told me many times that he wanted to make sure his grandson was secure. Isn't that true? Michael swallowed hard, his lips trembling. He nodded weakly, though he didn't look at his father. Robert slammed his palm against the table. That's a lie. I never said those words. The courtroom murmured. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Robert's voice cracked. Your Honor, I promised my wife that both my children would be protected. I have lived by that promise. This is not my will. It is a theft of everything I built. The judge regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and caution. Mr. Whitman, your testimony is noted, but the evidence remains the signed amendment with fingerprint verification. Unless compelling proof is presented, the court must defer to the authenticated document. Emily leaned closer to her father, whispering fiercely, Don't give up. There has to be something more. We can't let her win. But Linda maintained her mask. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, feigning hurt. I only ever tried to help this family. I cooked for him, cared for him, loved him like my own father, and now they accuse me of theft. It breaks my heart. Robert stared at her, his jaw tight. For decades, he had trusted smiles like hers. Now he saw the steel hidden beneath. Days of hearings dragged on. Witnesses testified. A neighbor recalled seeing Linda handle Robert's mail. A clerk from the insurance office admitted he spoke with a woman claiming to be Robert's caretaker about policy details. Each piece added suspicion, but not certainty. The amendment still loomed like an immovable wall. At night, Robert barely slept. He sat in his armchair, Margaret's photo on the mantel, watching him like a silent judge. Maggie, he whispered, I tried to keep my promise, but maybe I failed. Emily would find him there, eyes wet, hands trembling. She would kneel beside him. You didn't fail, Dad. They failed you, and I won't stop until the truth is out. Finally, the day came for closing arguments. Harrison stood tall, his voice ringing through the courtroom. This case is not about documents. It is about trust. About a father's word, a promise to his children, and a woman who positioned herself to benefit from his decline. If the court validates this change without deeper scrutiny, we are saying to every elder in America, your word means nothing. Your life's work can be erased with a forged pen stroke. The judge nodded gravely, but Linda's attorney was quick to strike back. Your Honor, this is not about emotions. It is about law. The document is valid. The signature is verified. The notary confirmed. Mr. Whitman may be confused, and while that is unfortunate, the law cannot bend to sentiment. Robert felt his heart sink. Confused. That word echoed like a death sentence. The judge shuffled his notes, preparing to deliver the verdict. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Emily gripped her father's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Linda's lips curled in the faintest of smiles. She could already see victory. Before this court enters judgment, an assistant rushes in with newly discovered evidence produced just this morning. The judge paused as an assistant hurried forward, handing him a folder. He frowned, scanning the contents. What is this? The insurance company's representative stepped nervously to the stand. Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced, a recording from our call center archives. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. The room held its breath as the recording played. A voice, Robert's voice, calmly stated, Yes, I want to change my beneficiary to Linda Whitman. She has taken care of me, and I want everything in her name. Gasps filled the courtroom. Robert's face went pale. No, that's not me. I never said that. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth, pretending to be overcome. Dad, I can't believe you'd forget this. Emily jumped to her feet. That's not him. That's a fake. But the judge's face was grim. The voice sounds authentic. Unless proven otherwise, this supports the amendment. Robert's shoulders slumped. They've stolen even my voice. And in that moment, the battle felt lost. The recording ended and silence hung like a heavy shroud over the courtroom. Robert's heart pounded in his chest. He gripped the edge of the table, staring into the void as if searching for Margaret's face among the crowd. Emily broke the silence first. "Your Honor, please, this is not real. My father never made that call. I know his voice and I know his words. He would never say that." The judge's expression softened for a moment, but then he looked at Linda's attorney. "Is there confirmation of the recording's authenticity?" The attorney nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The voice matches Mr. Whitman's file with over 98% accuracy according to biometric analysis." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily turned to Michael, her eyes burning. "Michael, you know this isn't Dad. Say something." Michael shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. I don't know. It sounds like him." "It's not him," Emily snapped. "You're his son. Look at him. You know the truth." Michael's lips trembled. He glanced at Linda, who gave him the slightest nod, and he stayed silent. Robert's voice broke as he whispered, "Even my son won't defend me." The judge called a recess. People shuffled out, buzzing with speculation. In the hallway, reporters whispered, "Deep family rift. $1 million at stake. Son silent while father accused of forgetting." Inside the waiting room, Robert sat slumped in a chair, his cane leaning against his leg. Emily crouched beside him. "Dad, we'll find a way to fight this, I promise." Robert shook his head slowly. "Emily, they've taken my signature, my fingerprint, and now my voice. What else is left of me? What else can they steal?" His words pierced Emily's heart. She held his hand tightly. "They can't steal your truth. That's something they'll never own." Meanwhile, Linda stood outside the courthouse steps with Michael by her side. She adjusted her sunglasses, whispering, "It's almost over. Just a few more hours and everything is ours." Her tone was calm, almost soothing, but her eyes glittered with triumph. Michael swallowed hard. "Linda, maybe this has gone too far." She turned sharply, her voice a hiss only he could hear. "Don't you dare back out now. Do you want to look weak in front of your children? Do you want your father to hand everything to Emily instead?" Michael closed his eyes, torn between guilt and fear. Back inside, Harrison spread documents across the table. "We need a forensic expert. If this is a manipulated recording, there must be traces, digital fingerprints, inconsistencies in cadence." Emily nodded. "Then let's get one. We can't let them win with a fake." The judge reconvened the court. As everyone returned to their seats, Robert forced himself upright, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Your Honor, I am 75 years old. I forget where I leave my glasses, but I do not forget my promises. I swore to my wife that both my children would be protected equally. That is the truth of my heart, and no recording will ever change it." The courtroom went still. For a moment, even Linda's mask faltered. Emily whispered under her breath, "Hold on, Dad. Just a little longer. The truth will come out." And though the evidence weighed against him, the fire in Robert's eyes refused to die. Because deep down, he knew this battle was far from over. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He sat alone in the living room, the clock ticking louder than usual. The house felt colder, emptier. In the silence, he imagined Margaret's voice. "Protect them, Robert. Don't let them fight." He closed his eyes, whispering back, "I'm trying, Maggie. God knows I'm trying." Emily found him at dawn, still awake, staring at the policy papers like they were holy scripture. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Dad, no matter what happens tomorrow, I'll stand with you. We'll expose the truth." Robert nodded faintly, his eyes glistening. "Then, I'm not alone. Do you think Linda's mask will finally crack? Or will the court believe the fake recording? If you were in Robert's place, what would you do, fight to the end or accept defeat? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the shocking next chapter of this family's battle. The courtroom battle left Robert hollow. When the gavel struck and the session adjourned, he felt as though the sound had echoed through his bones, cracking something inside him. That night he returned home, not as the proud father he once was, but as a man stripped of dignity, questioned even in his own truth. He sat heavily in his chair by the window, the same place he had read bedtime stories to Michael and Emily decades ago. Now the stories were gone. Only silence remained. "Maybe they're right," he whispered into the dim room. "Maybe I don't remember. Maybe I'm losing myself." The words terrified him. All his life, Robert had clung to his memory, his promise to Margaret, his duty to his children, his belief that his word meant something. Now he was forced to wonder if his mind was betraying him just as cruelly as his family. Emily knelt beside him, her hand clasped his tightly. "Dad, don't you dare believe that. You are not losing your mind. You are losing to liars. There's a difference." Robert's eyes filled with tears. He turned to her, his voice trembling. "How do you know? They had my signature, my fingerprint now, even my voice. What if I did say those words and just forgot?" Emily shook her head firmly. "No, I know you. I know your heart. You would never betray Mom's memory. You would never betray me." She pressed his hand against her chest. "Feel that? That's me. I'm here. I believe you even if the whole world doesn't." For the first time in days, Robert's tears flowed freely. He pulled Emily into his arms, his frail body trembling. "I tried so hard, Emily. I worked my whole life to give you and Michael a future, and this is what I leave behind, a fight in court, my own son doubting me." "No," Emily whispered fiercely. "That's not what you're leaving behind. You leave behind sacrifice, love, and a promise worth more than money. This battle doesn't erase that." Robert leaned back, staring at the framed photograph of Margaret on the mantel. He remembered her laughter, the way she brushed flour from her apron after baking, the way she kissed his forehead, and said, "You're stronger than you think." He closed his eyes. "Maggie, I don't know if I have strength left, but I promised you, and I have to keep that promise even if it kills me." The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Robert bowed his head, his lips moving in prayer. "Lord, give me clarity. Give me truth. If I can't protect myself, let me at least protect my daughter from despair. Let her know her father is not a liar." The prayer brought a sliver of peace, but fear still lingered. He wondered, what does a man leave behind if not his word? Money fades, houses crumble, but a man's honor that was supposed to be eternal. Emily placed a blanket over his shoulders. "Rest, Dad. Tomorrow we fight again, and I'll be right there with you." He looked at her with weary eyes. "Then, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Do you believe Robert should keep fighting even when the law seems against him? Or is there a point when a man should surrender for peace?" Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss how this story turns next. The following morning, as the sun crept through the blinds, Emily's phone buzzed. She answered, her voice tired but hopeful. After a few moments, her eyes widened. She turned to her father, her lips trembling with a fragile smile. "Dad, a forensic audio expert has agreed to review the recording. He thinks he might find something." Robert's heart jolted. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe the battle wasn't over after all. As dawn light poured across the kitchen table, Robert sat quietly, lost in memories that refused to fade. He remembered the early years when money was scarce, but laughter was plenty. The smell of Margaret's bread baking, the sound of little feet racing across the hallway, Michael tugging at his sleeve for help with homework, Emily singing softly to her dolls. Those were the days when his promise meant everything, when his word was enough to build trust, to hold a family together. Now that same word was questioned, dissected, treated as fragile and unreliable. He wondered how a life of sacrifice could be reduced to a single line on a forged document, a voice on a manipulated tape. Emily sat across from him, watching the storm of emotions on her father's face. "Dad," she said softly, "you always told me that truth outlives lies. Maybe it takes time, maybe it feels impossible, but it always comes out." Robert sighed. "I'm not sure if I still believe that. I gave everything, my strength, my years, my health, and still, they call me confused, a man whose word means nothing." Emily leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Then let me believe it for you. You carried me when I was too small to walk. Let me carry you now. This fight isn't just yours anymore. It's ours." Her words pierced through the fog of despair. Robert closed his eyes, hearing Margaret's voice blending with Emily's, one from memory, one Olfa, and beside him, both urging him not to surrender. He whispered almost to himself, "A man leaves behind his honor, and that honor becomes his children's shield. If I give up, I lose more than money. I lose the shield I promised to give you. Emily squeezed his hand. Then, don't give up. We'll find a way. And whatever happens, I'll make sure the world knows who you really are. For the first time in days, Robert felt the weight on his chest lift ever so slightly. Hope was fragile, but it was alive. The air in the small office smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Stacks of case files lined the walls, and in the middle sat a man with silver hair and sharp, steady eyes. Dr. Alan Mercer, a retired FBI audio analyst, had spent decades pulling apart recordings to uncover the truth behind them. Emily introduced her father with quiet respect. Dr. Mercer. This is my dad, Robert Whitman. He's the man whose voice was stolen. Robert extended a trembling hand. I'm not sure what you'll find, but I need to know if I'm going crazy or if someone really put words in my mouth. Mercer clasped his hand firmly. Mr. Whitman, let me tell you something. Technology today can make angels sound like devils, and devils sound like saints. If you never said those words, chances are the tape will betray itself. Every lie leaves fingerprints. Robert blinked his throat tight. It was the first time anyone outside of Emily had spoken with such certainty. Mercer dimmed the lights and loaded the file onto his computer. Waves of sound appeared on the screen, jagged lines and colorful spectrograms. Now let's listen carefully, he said, adjusting his headphones. The courtroom recording filled the room. Robert's voice, or something that sounded like it, calmly declaring Linda the sole beneficiary. Robert's hands clenched into fists. That's not me, he whispered. Mercer nodded. Let's test it. He slowed the playback. Notice the background hum. That's an office air conditioner. I compared this background hum to authenticated calls the insurer produced in Discovery. The spectral noise floor is inconsistent with their system profile. Emily leaned forward. So the environment doesn't match exactly. Mercer tapped the screen. And here, listen to the cadence. Mr. Whitman, say this line for me. She has taken care of me, and I want everything in her name. Robert repeated the line. His voice trembled, but its rhythm was different. Mercer overlaid the two recordings. See this? Natural speech has micro-pauses, breaths, small inconsistencies. This recording is too clean, too smooth. It's stitched together like a quilt of stolen words. Robert's eyes filled with tears. So I'm not losing my mind? Mercer looked him straight in the eye. You are not. This is not your voice. It's a manufactured lie. Emily covered her mouth, her eyes shining. I knew it, Dad. The truth always leaves a trace. Robert broke down, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in weeks, the weight of doubt lifted. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't weak. He was a man whose honor had been attacked and now at last defended. Mercer printed out his preliminary findings. I'll testify in court. We'll run a full forensic analysis, and I'll explain to the judge exactly how this was fabricated. Robert stood taller than he had in months. His voice steadied. They stole my signature, my fingerprint, my voice. But they can't steal the truth, and this time I'll fight back with everything I have. That night, Emily found her father sitting with his Bible open on the table. He whispered a prayer of thanks, then looked up at her with new fire in his eyes. They tried to silence me. Tomorrow they will hear my real voice. Do you believe technology can both trap and save us? Would you trust a forensic expert to decide your fate? Comment below if you think deepfake voices should be admissible in court, and don't forget to subscribe for the shocking reveal. The following week, preparations for court intensified. Harrison, their lawyer, rehearsed Mercer's testimony. Emily organized every email, every note, every tiny shred of evidence into neat binders. And Robert practiced speaking again, determined not to sound like a broken man, but like a father, defending his family's honor. On the morning of the new hearing, the courthouse was packed. Reporters filled the benches. Michael sat stiffly beside Linda, whose calm smile hadn't cracked once. Robert, cane in hand, walked slowly into the courtroom, his head held high. Emily at his side whispered, "You're not alone, Dad. Not today." The judge glanced over the crowded room. "We are here to review new evidence regarding the Whitman case." Mercer stepped forward, carrying his files. The room quieted. Linda's smile flickered just for a second. What happens when truth finally meets lies in open court? The answer may shock you. The night before the hearing, Robert sat at the dining table with Emily and Harrison. His papers were spread out neatly, and Mercer's report sat on top like a shield of truth. Harrison coached him carefully. "When you testify, Mr. Whitman, speak from the heart. Don't worry about technical details. That's Mercer's job. The judge needs to hear your conviction, your promise to your wife, your intention to your children. That carries weight." Robert nodded slowly. "I can do that. I may be old, but my word is still mine." Emily smiled through her worry. "Dad, you've carried this family your whole life. Tomorrow, let us carry you." Later that evening, as Robert practiced his testimony, his voice grew stronger with each repetition. The words that once shook with doubt now rang with clarity. "I never changed my beneficiary. I never betrayed my children. The recording is a lie, and I stand by my truth." Meanwhile, across town, Linda stood before her vanity mirror rehearsing her own lines. "Your Honor, all I ever wanted was to protect him. If he says otherwise, it's only his memory failing." She adjusted her necklace, practicing tears that would fall on cue. Michael watched from the doorway, silent, his conscience gnawing at him, but his will too weak to act. The tension between the two households thickened as if the entire city held its breath. The morning came. As Robert prepared to step into the courtroom once more, Emily whispered, "This is it, Dad. Truth against lies. Let's finish what they started." And with Mercer by his side, Robert walked forward, not as a broken man, but as a father reclaiming his voice. The final day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself shared the weight of what was about to unfold. The courtroom was packed. Reporters jostled for seats. Neighbors leaned forward with wide eyes, and whispers rippled through the benches. Robert entered slowly, cane in hand, Emily steadying him. His steps were heavy, but his chin was lifted. For weeks he had carried the shame of doubt, but now he carried something else, the truth wrapped in the courage of his daughter's belief. Linda sat across the room, her pearl necklace catching the light. She smiled faintly, her calm mask firmly in place. Michael sat beside her, hands clasped tightly in his lap, his face pale and withdrawn. The judge struck the gavel. "We will now hear from Dr. Alan Mercer regarding the authenticity of the disputed audio recording." Mercer approached the stand carrying his files with the confidence of a man who had lived his life in the pursuit of truth. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, members of the court, I have analyzed the recording submitted as evidence. In my professional opinion, this recording is not genuine. It has been manipulated using voice cloning technology commonly known as deepfake audio." Gasps filled the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Mercer continued, his voice calm and precise. "First, the background noise does not match the environment of the insurance company's call center. Second, the speech cadence is unnaturally smooth, indicative of machine splicing. Third, spectrogram analysis shows frequency artifacts consistent with synthetic voice generation. In plain terms, this is not Mr. Whitman's voice. It is a manufactured lie." Linda's smile wavered. She shifted in her seat, her hand tightening around Michael's arm. Emily stood, eyes blazing. "You hear that Dad wasn't lying. He never changed the beneficiary." She turned to Michael. "Brother, look at Dad and tell me you still believe this lie." Michael's lips parted, but no words came. He glanced at his father, then at Linda, then dropped his gaze to the table. His silence spoke louder than anything. Robert slowly rose to his feet, gripping his cane for support. His voice, though aged, carried through the room with steady power. "I may be 75 years old. My hands shake, my memory slips, but my truth is not weak. They forged my signature. They stole my fingerprint. They even tried to steal my voice. But there is one thing they cannot forge: my promise. I swore to my wife that both my children would be protected. And I will keep that promise, even if I have to fight to my last breath." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned back, eyes narrowed with respect. Linda shifted uncomfortably, forcing a tear down her cheek. "I only ever tried to protect him," she whispered, but the words felt hollow now, swallowed by the weight of evidence. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. "This court has heard conflicting testimony, but with the forensic analysis presented today, the matter of authenticity must be addressed." Emily's heart pounded. She gripped her father's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Across the room, Linda stared at the judge, her lips curled in a smile that seemed to dare him to rule against her. The judge lifted the papers before him. The room held its breath. In light of this new evidence, the court finds the gavel struck once, but his words cut off in the roar of anticipation. The verdict hung suspended in the air, a razor's edge between truth and deception. Do you think justice will prevail, or will money and manipulation still win the day? Tell us in the comments what you believe, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the final verdict in Robert's story will shock you. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and stay with us for more true-to-heart tales of family betrayal and survival. Thank you for watching.